Sh Sheikha said she's running late. She'll start around 5:15, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Can everyone hear me? Inshallah. Okay. I am set up in a different location than I normally am set up. So apologies. I had to change space today. And we'll leave it at that. Inshallah, we'll get started with the dua. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير وابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise is due to God, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his family and followers and companions. We intend to learn and to teach and to remind and be reminded, to benefit and be benefited, to improve and be improved, to encourage holding fast to the book of God in the way of his messenger, to call to guidance and to direct towards good, hoping for the countenance of God and his pleasure, his proximity, and his reward. And peace and blessings of Allah be upon our Master Muhammad, his noble family, his sincere followers and companions. Ameen. So today, inshallah, we are going to continue in the series that we had started at the beginning of this wonderful month of Ramadan. And even though we were on schedule to be talking about a different verse, I wanted to go back and contemplate more on one of the verses that we had planned to talk about last week, but we actually didn't do. And so I didn't want to just miss that. And it's perfect timing. It's subhanAllah, couldn't be better timing as we enter the last 10 days of this month and the last 10 nights. And, the pressure is on. And so, inshallah, we'll kind of get started. And I'm going to share my screen. Everyone can see my screen? Alhamdulillah. Okay. So just want to see if I can move this. Yes. All right. So the verses in the series that we are doing the month of Ramadan deal with striving to attain the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and turning ourselves towards him in worship for love, out of love. Yes, there's reward, there's paradise, there's forgiveness and being saved from hellfire. And of course we want all of those things. But above and beyond, the eternity and bliss and paradise and protection from punishment and hellfire, what we want is God's love above and beyond all of that. And his love is something that we can not only strive for in this life, but we can taste it in this life and we can experience it in this life. It's not a reward that a person delays until the hereafter. And one of the signs of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us is that that we experience in our hearts love for him. We think it's our own love, but it's actually his love that he's placed in our hearts. So that alone is something that I think everyone in this who's watching, everyone who's listening, if you've ever felt anything good towards your creator, know that it came to you from him. And that's a sign of his love for you. That's something we celebrate, we're grateful for. And we want to approach Ramadan with that. And so we decided to look at verses in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah yuhib, or Wallahu yuhib, that truly Allah loves, or and Allah loves. There are verses that end, and then after Allah mentions what that He loves, He mentions a category of people and actions of these categories of people. And so we want to be of those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves, and so we want to practice whatever that word is that comes afterwards, out of seeking His love, wanting His love, yearning for His love, and wanting for His love to increase in our lives. And so, interestingly, the clause that comes up at the very end of verse 159 is Inna Allaha yuhibbul mutawakkilin, that truly God loves those who trust. those who put their trust in him. And the context of these verses is really interesting. I could spend the entire hour just talking about tawakkul and how to be from the mutawakkilin, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I will also the way that this reminder comes to us is actually very powerful. So just doing tafsir of the verses themselves and what these verses then give context to for the meaning of tawakkul in our lives, inshallah, we hope to be enriching. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is in Surah Ali Imran, فبما رحمة من الله لنت لهم ولو كنت فظا غليظ القلب لانفضوا من حولك فاعف عنهم واستغفر لهم وشاورهم في الأمر فإذا عزمت فتوكل على الله إن الله يحب المتوكلين. The verse afterwards, إن ينصركم الله فلا غالب لكم وإن يخذلكم فمن ذا الذي ينصركم من بعده وعلى الله فليتوكل المؤمنون. So pardon them, ask forgiveness for them, and consult them in affairs. And when you are resolved, trust in God. Truly, God loves those who trust, those who put their trust in Him. If God helps you, none shall overcome you. And if He forsakes you, who then can help you thereafter? It can also mean, and who then can help you after Him? Now, these are very powerful verses. The second verse 160 is one that we've actually heard probably many times. It's something that's invoked um, uh, for different causes, whether people are striving to do good deeds or whether people are striving to, whether they were striving on the battlefield, any kind of like effort, arduous effort. This is something that people, a verse that people come back to, that if God helps you, then, how can you be overwhelmed or overcome? And if He leaves you, then how could you ever have a helper afterwards or after Him? Now, I want to go to the context of these verses. And if I were to go over, read, or review the tafsir of just the verses by which these reminders come to us in, that would take the entire class just to do the tafsir. So I'm actually just going to read. And I'm going to read it in English, and I'm using the translation from the Study Quran. And I want to read the verses so everyone can be shocked with me in terms of meaning, and can be surprised with me, and can be amazed with me, inshallah, because it gives it away. And this starting at verse 152. And God certainly was true to His promise to you when you were eradicating them by His leave until the moment you lost heart and quarreled with one another about the matter and disobeyed. And after He had showed you that which you loved, among you are those who desire this world, and among you are those who desire the hereafter. Then He turned you from them to test you, and He certainly pardoned you. God is possessed of bounty for the believers. What is being described in these verses is the Battle of Uhud. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam after the Battle of Uhud, and he's telling them what has happened. He's telling us what has happened. When you were climbing, casting a glance to no one, while the messenger was calling you from your rear, so he recompensed you with sorrow upon sorrow, that you may not grieve over what escaped you or what befell you, and God is aware of whatsoever you do. Then He sent down upon you, after sorrow, security, a sleepiness enveloping a company among you, while a company were anxious over themselves, thinking about God, what is not true. The thinking of the age of ignorance, saying, do we have any decision in this? Say, the decision belongs entirely to God. They hide in their souls what they do not disclose to you, saying, had we any decision in this, we would not have been slain here. Say, had you stayed in your houses, those who were destined to be slain would have gone out to their places of rest. And this is so that God may test what is in your chests, and so that He may reveal what is in your hearts. And God knows what lies within the chests. Those of you who turned away on the day the two hosts met, Satan alone made them slip because of part of what they committed. And God certainly pardoned them. Truly, God is forgiving, clement. O you who believe, be not like those who disbelieve, and say of their brethren when they travel upon the earth or a campaign, had they stayed with us, they would not have died and been slain, that God may make that a source of regret in their hearts. And God gives life and causes death, and God sees whatsoever you do. And indeed, if you are slain or die in the way of God, truly forgiveness and mercy from God are better than what they amass. And indeed, if you are slain or die, truly unto God shall you be gathered. Then it was by a mercy from God that thou wert gentle with them. Hadst thou been severe and hard hearted, they would have scattered from about thee. So pardon them, ask forgiveness for them, and consult them in affairs. And when thou art resolved, trust in God. Truly, God loves those who trust. If God helps you, none shall overcome you. And if he forsakes you, who then can help you thereafter? And in God, let the believers trust. So now that you have the whole body of the verses that these last two verses are revealed in, there's a bigger story that's being told about tawakkul, and there's a bigger story that's being told with so many lessons. What is being described is in the Battle of Uhud, the archers were told not to leave the mountain of Uhud, and they had thought that the battle had been won already, as they saw the Quraysh retreat from the battlefield. They saw the war booty, the spoils of war, and they saw some people were going to get them. And when they saw that happening, they thought, okay, we've won the battle. Let's just go and, let's leave our posts and, not get left behind, not get, and so, looting, not looting, looting's the wrong word, but gathering the spoils of war. And as they're, they leave their post on without being given permission to. Now you can imagine, on a battle where soldiers are trained to listen and obey, that you never leave your post. You don't make an ijtihad in the moment that is not in your hands in the first place. You have to obey the command because everyone, the whole situation depends on it, right? So the companions who are on the mountain of Uhud, and they were the archers, they it's being described in the verses that some of these people have, they desire the life of this world, and that's what caused them to slip. Or shaitan caused them to slip, and it was because of this thing that they've committed, which is this love for the life of this world, that would cause them to disobey a direct command. And it's really interesting too, because when a Muslim slips, when a Muslim or a believer does something wrong, commits a sin, often they do the sin thinking what they're doing is actually right in that context. Like it's the thing they're supposed to do. They don't do the sin usually thinking this is absolutely forbidden and I'm still going to do it. What they think is either this is not that big a deal, or this is the right thing to do in this situation. This is a good thing to do in this situation. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes us in the Quran that the shaitan beautifies, the disobedience to people. He makes the sins seem fair seeming to people. And so that's how the person, makes the mistake in the first place, is that in that situation, all of a sudden, it looks like we're winning. It looks like, what's the big deal? Let me just go down there and gather the spoils with everyone else. And so they disobey a major, a direct command on the battlefield that costs lives. And in this context, the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching or telling the companions about their shortcoming, about their mistake, and that they have the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to know that if they're slain, they're only going to be returning to God, right? And not being on the battlefield, there's no there's nothing you can do from the asbab. Like if you were meant to die, the verses describe, the angels of death are going to find you in your homes, where in your places of rest, and you will die in your home. You cannot escape death by avoiding, by not showing up to the battlefield. There is such thing as the divine decree. This is something that helps to actually make our hearts strong and not have fear of harm and not have fear of death. Just knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is in charge. And again, that doesn't mean that a person necessarily, like, puts themselves out in harm's way, or is, what's the word? Reckless. A person takes whatever measures they take, but to know that if they die, then that death was meant for them. If they live, then that life was meant for them. And that the decree is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The reward is also with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that neither situation, dying nor living, and again for the Muslims, as the Prophet Muhammad said, that ajaban amrul mu'min, that for the, isn't it amazing the affair of the believer? If something good happens to them and they're grateful, right, then that is good for them. They're grateful to God. If something bad happens to them and they're patient, that is also good for them. So um, we don't have a bad outcome. There's no such thing as a bad outcome for a believer, which I think is amazing, right? I remember a teacher saying this once, about Islamic work, and I was thinking about something in relation to, did we do it well? Did we do it good enough? And um, did we fail? Did we make some, like that whole questioning that people go through? I was going through myself. And what they said was that in Islamic work, there is no such thing as success or failure. There is only niyyah. There's only intention. So a person intends and they do the right thing on principle, and the outcome is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They strive, but they leave the outcome in His hands, and that's part of tawakkul. That's part of having tawakkul. You do the right thing on principle. You take the right measures. Again, we work from a place of principles and not results. If what we did is principled, it's done in the right way, it's done with the intention, then after that, we leave it in God's hands. We've done the part that we're going to be accountable for. And we don't worry about quote unquote success or failure. All of that is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those are in His hands. Now, going back to these verses, there are, I want to say, 10 lessons, I think. And there's more, but there's 10 lessons from these two specific verses I want us to think about or to go through. Now, first, when the verse mentions that لو كنت فظا غليظ القلب لانفضوا من حولك, that when, let's see, okay, so that translation is not, the English translation is not here for that, but I'll just read it for you. So earlier in the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that had you been severe and hard-hearted, they would have scattered from about thee. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the blessing of فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ, and it was as a mercy from God that you were gentle with them. So Allah is telling the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, again, the gentleness that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed the companions in the context of the Battle of Uhud, first, that's a mercy from God. That's a mercy from God upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu and upon the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. And had the Prophet been harsh with them after their mistake, and it was a big mistake, right? It's a lot of people died. They're shuhada. We don't say that that's a disaster, because it was from God's decree, and they were martyred there, and they have a high rank with Him, but they disobeyed. And but had the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ been hard-hearted with them as a result of their disobedience, they would have scattered. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet that they would have scattered from around him. And what's referred to here in the tafsir of Imam al-Tabari is that they actually would have left him on the battlefield. They would have abandoned him on the battlefield. Had the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ been harsh with them and they would have abandoned him. Now that's also a really heavy thing for us to think about, because we're talking about the best generation that has ever lived, right? The prophets are the best people, but the best generation was the generation of the Sahaba, of the companions. And had the Prophet Muhammad SAW, who they knew to be a prophet of God and the last and final messenger and the greatest, and they knew this without a doubt, had he been harsh-hearted with them, had he been harsh with them, then they would have actually abandoned him. And one of the interpretations is that it would have been on the battlefield at Uhud, and another interpretation was that they would have like left following him. So there is a lesson in being merciful, and that this is a mercy from Allah, that we are merciful with others even when they make great mistakes. And I can't imagine anyone that you have trusted or you have relied on sort of dropping the ball so hard like this situation in Uhud. But what it, that it's a reminder to us that the answer to when people do that, um, that the response from us is that we have mercy with them. We have mercy with them, and that's a mercy from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. So that's the first thing. The second is that the beginning, or here it says, so pardon them, right? Ask forgiveness for them and consult them in affairs. So um, let's go to consult them in affairs first. Again, here are people who completely dropped the ball, and um, it was a huge shortcoming. To go back and to get their advice and their consultation in a situation that they failed in, right? When the archers left their post, they failed. To go back after that and to continue to get their advice and consultation, right? This is what the Prophet Muhammad SAW is being commanded to do, to continue to seek their shura. And here the when it refers to matters of war. Obviously, when it comes to the deen, the Prophet Muhammad SAW is receiving direct revelation, so he doesn't consult them in that way. But he on matters of war is where he is going to consult them. These are matters of the world. And um, the before the battle happened, the Prophet Muhammad SAW actually did consult the companions in Medina, and he asked them, about whether they should have the battle happen close to the city or whether they should ride out and meet the idolaters in battle. And so this was something he was already doing with them. But this is sort of again a reminder that even after people have failed so big, um, you go back and you still consult them, and you still get their insights and their advice in the same way that you had before. Now, there are opinions that say that the purpose of the Allah Subhanahu wa Taala telling the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to consult them in affairs is only a way of sort of, it's an etiquette on the it's an ed, it's a yeah it's like an etiquette on the part of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It's showing beautiful courtesy of the Prophet Muhammad SAW towards his companions, and that it wasn't necessarily something that he needed to do because he had access to direct revelation. And yet there are others who say, no, that the Prophet Muhammad SAW, uh, you know, is being commanded to seek advice in worldly matters because he himself has, in different narrations, has actually, there's a narration where he says, "You all know more about the affairs of this world of yours," meaning that when it comes to matters of this world, that the Prophet ﷺ didn't necessarily have as much access to as people who were involved in direct experience. Um, it's good for him to consult them still in these matters. So there's a difference of opinion. Some said he did it as an etiquette. Others said that no, it's what he said, that he told the companions, "You know more about the affairs of this world than I do," and that's why he's consulting, to get genuine consultation from them. The others have said that the consultation that the Prophet Muhammad SAW is being commanded to do was a way of establishing a rule of leadership in among the Muslim community, that the leader doesn't take unilateral action, that they involve themselves always in shura first. And again, this is going to be related to tawakkul because we see the progression in the verse. So the Prophet Muhammad SAW is to continue to get advice and to consult the companions after in matters of war and in worldly matters after they have failed in a huge matter of war. And he's gentle with them, and he's also commanded to pardon them and to ask for their forgiveness. Now I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but I will. It's one thing for someone to make a mistake towards you, or to fail in something in their relationship towards you, or something that has big ramifications, whatever it is, whether they're wronging you specifically, or they've really failed in some way that affects either people or outcomes that are dear to you. Now you can forgive them, you can pardon them. You can say in your heart, I'm not going to hold it against them. um, but then it's another level to actually turn to Allah and make dua for their forgiveness, right? You're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to now forgive them. You can forgive someone, or you can feel like you have forgiven someone for something that they've done to you. But the next layer of that, excuse me, is to to genuinely make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives them. And so I want us to take this beautiful lesson here. Sometimes I started this class thinking I was going to, in preparation, thinking I was going to do a lot of readings on tawakkul. But what ended up happening, especially in this part, is a huge opportunity for contemplation on forgiveness. We are entering the last 10 days of Ramadan where we hope to be forgiven. And we hope for all of our sins to be forgiven. And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He showers us with mercy when we are merciful with others. And this is also a time as we are turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of love, wanting His love and wanting His forgiveness for ourselves, to forgive others, in order to open that door to forgive others. And if we can think about anyone in your life, if you can think about the people in your life that you feel a certain hurt from, um, they could be family members, they could be coworkers, they could be whoever it is, but in your heart you feel that they've wronged you or harmed you personally in some way. To try to go beyond just forgiving them in your heart, but to actually, if you can, take a few moments now, and we'll do it. Uh, you know, where you make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives them. So I'm going to just pause. I'm going to pause, and I'm going to ask that everyone who is with us online right now, and everyone who is watching either through YouTube or through the Zoom participants that we have, welcome. Thank you guys for joining us through Zoom, through the password. It's always nice to have the locals with us, alhamdulillah. But just make a list in your mind of even 3 or 4 people, and inshallah, you may not even have that many, but just search your heart for someone that you feel like, man, that they let you down in some way, and forgive them, and ask that, make a sincere dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, oh Allah, please forgive so and so. And oftentimes if we do this, we notice that sometimes it's two ways. Maybe the person has done something to us, but we haven't been perfectly great to them either. Oh Allah, forgive the way this person was towards me, and forgive the way that I was towards them. Forgive both of us. So inshallah, we'll take a few minutes for that. Inshallah, we will move on. But before we do, I just want to ask those who have joined us through Zoom, and you can either um, write in the chat box or you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Um, if anyone wants to just talk about how that felt or any reflections they have from doing that. You can also write something into the chat box if you'd like it to be shared anonymously. I can do that as well. Okay, we don't have any sharers again this week. I should do what I did at the for the story time is I just call the kids out and I tell them to answer the question. But I won't do that. I know it's one thing to have to do that in a class. It's a different thing to do that knowing that it's being streamed on YouTube. So no worries. But you can send something anonymously if you'd like. You can send it in the chat box directly to me, and I won't. If you want to do it that way, I won't say your name at any time. It doesn't have to be just now. So I'll share with you all something interesting about when I read this and when in doing the reading the tafsir regarding this, that the Prophet Muhammad SAW, this was considered, he was obligated to, as a prophet, to pardon them and to also pray for their forgiveness. That was an obligation for him. But it's only an encouragement for the believers, right? For the believers, that's not a requirement. It's considered an act of, let's say, ihsan. It's an act of doing more or an act of, striving for what is better. And okay, alhamdulillah, we got some responses. We had someone said that it made them feel good. And another comment that came in through YouTube is lighter, like a weight came off. And subhanAllah, isn't that amazing that when we practice mercy and forgive others, that we end up actually being the ones who benefit the most from that. Um, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us better than what we gave, right? And we experience it. So when I read this, that this is something that's a command for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it's an encouragement for others, for the salihin, for the righteous people to strive towards what is better. There's a recipe in that for just understanding, did I really forgive them? Because sometimes a person feels like I think I've forgiven so and so, but then the memory will come back up and they'll get mad all over again, right? And if a person remembers something and then it's one thing if it's something that's hurtful and causes pain or sadness or tears. It's another thing if they're going to restart the whole fight, 5 years later. So no, that's not forgiveness. They haven't let it go. But in supplication and in asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive them and making that your prayer for them, something beautiful that does is it puts in your heart goodwill, right? It puts in your heart goodwill towards whoever it is that you want to forgive, that you to truly forgive, and it replaces the feeling of disappointment, which may have been the more heavy feeling in the heart, for lack of a better term. It replaces that with, um, again, goodwill, wanting good for that person. So disappointment is a very heavy feeling to carry around, whereas hoping for good for God's creation, despite their flaws and mistakes, that's a very beautiful, uplifting feeling to have in our hearts. And so there's such a blessing, subhanallah, in forgiveness. Now, how do we, there's a part of tawakkul that's in this. If we trust in Allah and if we recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who the decision is with, right? And that's what's being discussed in the verses that I've mentioned before, that all of the matters are in His hands, that it's His decree, that even when a harm has touched us or a difficulty has touched us, if we really trust in God and rely on God, then we don't say, if only they wouldn't have done this and that, right? What were the people who doubted say? If only we had stayed home, that we wouldn't have died. If only they would have stayed home, they wouldn't have died, right? That's an if only statement. The Prophet ﷺ said, beware of if, for if is from the shaitan, the word if. And why? Because there's the divine decree. And so part of something that has already happened in the past is we know that it was part of God's divine decree for us to have experienced that harm or that difficulty or that pain or that whatever it was. It was that was all within the decree. And so when you look towards God and knowing that God never um, puts upon us anything that is not good for us, then it allows a person to look past the human shortcoming and mistake and failure because they were only manifesting, right, a decree that was meant to happen. And for that reason, we pardon them, and also because we hope. Just as much as we trust in God, we also hope in Him and we want to have His mercy in our lives and His love in our lives. And so we know that He loves when we show mercy, and then He shows mercy to us. So going back to the verse, so pardon them, ask forgiveness for them, and consult them in affairs. And then it says, and when you are resolved, trust in God. Truly, God loves those who trust. Here, and when you are resolved, this is, commentators have said, this is after a person has taken shura. This is after the person has consulted with others. You've asked the experts on any decision. You've gathered the information. You've done your worldly part, right? And then it's time to come to a decision after you've again gathered and consulted others. Then once you make that decision, then you put your trust in God. And how do you come to the conclusion of the decision? Many scholars have said that the first step is to consult and gather the information. The second step is to pray istikhara, right? Sometimes the answer is so clear just from the consultation that you don't need istikhara because it's already become clear but through the consultation that something is an absolute no. And then other times there's still doubt in the matter. And so a person prays istikhara. They ask that Allah puts the right decision in their hearts and guides their hearts to a decision. Then when they find that, right, they find that decision, and that's when they put their trust in God. Once a person is resolved, then they turn to God with their trust. Now, that process is confusing for a lot of people because they're like, well, if we just put trust in God, if we just relied on God, why would we need to consult anyone? Right? We could just consult God. God, if this is good for me, let it happen. God, if it's not good for me, that's what istikhara is. But even in istikhara, we're taught by the Prophet Muhammad SAW to consult others. And Allah is telling the Prophet, who receives direct revelation from him through the angel Jibreel, to consult people in the world about our affairs. And so there's a beautiful discussion about this. We're going to get to it in a little bit, but it's like, how do we do tawakkul? So we know that Allah loves the mutawakkilin. We know that He loves those who put their trust in Him. But how do we do it? How do we, actually get ourselves there, and on a very practical level? How do we practice tawakkul? Now, another beautiful element in these verses is that the companions, they, subhanallah, they were in so much pain after the Battle of Uhud. Like a lot of them were really upset with themselves. They were upset with what had happened. And it wasn't that they were upset with, okay, like the quote unquote lost the battle or they had to flee from the battlefield. But it was like their own performance. Like, how could we have done that? How did that happen? You know? And you know, it's so beautiful because these verses, and it's mentioned in the tafsir of Imam al-Razi, that these verses, they gave solace to the companions that not only are they forgiven by God for the shortcoming, but specifically that the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet to consult with them, um, is an indication that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still looks upon them with favor. That like we still have a place with the Prophet of Allah. Like we are not the lost generation. We are still there. We're still going to be supporting him. We still have that role that Allah is telling him to consult us. That means that we still have God's favor. And that was a huge glad tiding for them, because it's one thing to be forgiven, it's another thing to be redeemed. And what they felt in these verses from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was giving them redemption, in telling the Prophet ﷺ to continue to consider their judgment. Now, I think there are so many lessons for us in Muslim organizations, so many lessons for us in leadership and family management, like in these beautiful subtleties, like forgiving, overlooking, and then continuing to give people the role that they wanted to do right in the first place, but they made a mistake, and supporting them in that. There's so much that we can take, that the mercy is not just limited, subhanAllah, just to, um, I won't hold it against you, but it's beyond that. And it's so much more magnanimous and so much more generous than that, that it's healing. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us like those, like, I shouldn't say like the Prophet, because none of us can truly be like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but may he make us like those who truly seek to embody from the mercy that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to teach us. The idea of consulting people in our worldly affairs is significant too. Asking people who know, asking people who are experts. Not everyone is exactly the same. Like, imagine that the Prophet Muhammad SAW, because he doesn't, and he told the companions, I don't, you know this about the affairs of this world of yours, right? That going to people who know something, or have specialized knowledge in something, is part of tawakkul, right? It's not just, I'm just going to do whatever I want and not care because I have so much trust in God, but that consultation of seeking out the best opinion, seeking out the best guidance for something from people who have the requisite knowledge. So that's another aspect of it. If we have a medical condition, we don't just Google something on the internet and try to find an answer about a surgery that we need. We would actually probably consult more than one doctor, more than one surgeon, people who have specialized knowledge. A person can do that reading just for their own, benefit, but that doesn't give them the level of insight they need for whatever issue they're facing. So that's another thing to take from it. In matters of law, to consult those who know the law. In matters of politics, to consult those who know that. In matters of ethics, religion, consult those who have studied that well. Um, uh, we should consult from scholars, and we should consult from senior scholars as well, when we are on issues that we need that type of clarification for in our lives. So there's a sunnah in this also of seeking knowledge from people who know. SubhanAllah, even to the extent that the Prophet ﷺ is consulting with companions about worldly matters. There's a beautiful statement from Imam Ali, karamallahu wajha, and he is describing the gentleness of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And in it, he's also describing the gentleness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the companions, and how essentially that the Prophet ﷺ was like, the whole religion came as something gentle for them. And he says, God has been so good to us. We were idolaters. And if the messenger of God had come with this entire religion all at once, and with the Quran all at once, the responsibilities would have weighed heavily upon us, and we would not have entered Islam. Rather, he called us to a single word. And when we accepted it and tasted the sweetness of faith, we accepted what came after it, word upon word, in a gentle way, until the religion was completed and the law was perfected. SubhanAllah. That's how the companions experienced growing in their deen with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and with the revelation. It was a little bit by a little bit. Of course, I think it's beautiful that he says that he called us to a single word, right? La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. That's the word that he called them to. And once he said that they accepted that and they tasted its sweetness, the rest was, the rest they could take. And even the rest did not come all at once. And the way that this is phrased, he says, until the religion was completed and the law was perfected. So many things that pertain to us in terms of the law is where many Muslims not only get confused, rightfully confused, but they're pushed away from religion. Like they're made to be Islamophobic because we're demanding things at times that they should not be demanded. And subhanAllah, you see in the progression of even the law itself, how people are supposed to grow in understanding it and in practicing it for themselves. And that's a whole other discussion. But just in general, subhanAllah, the attitude of gentleness in our, not just gentleness with others, even gentleness with ourselves as we seek to grow in our faith and to practice a little bit at a time and to continue to grow. And whenever, a person tries to do everything all at once, they get overwhelmed. And there's a narration from the Prophet Muhammad SAW about this as well, to enter the religion gently, because it is strong and it could overcome a person, it could overwhelm them, it could cause some people who try to do everything all at once overnight, it leads them to despair. And that's one of the tricks of shaitan, is to make someone really extreme. You get them, okay, so they're excited. How do I take advantage of the fact that they're excited? Make them extreme right now. Make them take all the rules, make them forget all the, exceptions, make them try to do everything that there possibly is to be done, make them try to do it all at once. And the person tries for a day and they can't do it, then they give up entirely, the all or nothing approach. And that's just to know that that's a trick from shaitan, and um, that's isti'jal also. It's like rushing into what should be entered into gently. And as we go enter the last 10 nights, obviously this is a time to push ourselves and to try to to work harder and to revive our efforts. But again, how do we do this from a place of tawakkul? How do we do this in a way that um, shows that we've put our trust in God in even um, the way that we relate to Him in our worship in the month of Ramadan and in these last 10 nights? How do we have tawakkul with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these last 10 nights? I'm realizing it's 6 o'clock and I was supposed to finish certain parts. I think I'm going to have to skip. Now, just quickly, verse 160. If God helps you, none shall overcome you. And if he forsakes you, who then can help you thereafter? Some commentators believed that that what this verse is referring to, Imam Razi mentions this, is that when God helps you, that refers to the Battle of Badr. No one could overcome them, even though they were only 300 and the enemy was 1,000, right? But if they have the help of Allah, they cannot be overcome. And in Uhud, the odds were a little bit better, but it said if he forsakes you. One of the commentaries is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring specifically to the battle of Uhud here, that he forsaked them on that battle, as earlier verses mentioned that he turned away from them in that moment, as a way to test them. Now, another interpretation is that it's more general, and that if he forsakes you, who then can help you, not afterwards, but who then can help you after him, right? If you don't have his support and his help, then is there anyone who can help you? And that's essentially what the message is saying. And this theme is repeated many times in the Quran. If God desires some harm for me, could they remove his harm, right? Could anyone remove that harm? And if he desires some mercy, can anyone withhold his mercy? So again, going back to God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the source of the good that we seek and that we yearn for, and also the one who would protect us from the harm that we would try to be away from. Now, I want to talk a little bit about tawakkul itself and the process of tawakkul, some of the merits of tawakkul, so that we can strive in that way, inshallah. In Surah Al-Talaq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. And for whoever relies on Allah, then he is enough for him. There's, again, an indication that if we do have the correct approach to tawakkul, we're going to talk about that, if we do have tawakkul in Allah as we're supposed to have, as what is meant, because there are things that people do thinking it's tawakkul, but it's not, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sufficient for us. And truly, he is sufficient for us. Umar ibn al-Khattab, he said that he heard the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ say, if you had all relied on Allah, if you all had tawakkul on Allah as you should rely on Him, then He would have certainly provided for you as He provides for the birds who wake up hungry in the morning and return with full stomachs at dusk. Right? Does a bird think about what tomorrow or the day after or a month from now? They wake up in the morning and they're hungry and they know they're going to go out into the world, and they know they're going to come home and their stomachs will be full. Their risk they will have their risk, their sustenance. And I heard also Sheikh Wali talking about this, and I believe he mentioned that this was something that Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani mentions in Al-Fath al-Rabbani, that our sustenance and our risk is more adamant about finding us than we could ever be about finding it, because it's part of God's divine decree, the risk that we receive, the sustenance that we receive. So to worry about something that is already more, um, uh, you know, lack of a better word, more adamant um, than we could ever be, because it's under, this is God's command to the risk to come to us in a particular way. For us to worry about that is silly, and it's a waste of time. It doesn't mean you don't go out into the world and work, but it means to worry about it is a problem and a waste of time. Abu Hatim al-Razi, he said that one of the things this hadith establishes is a fundamental principle that reliance on Allah is one of the most important means of acquiring one's sustenance and provision. If people want to follow along, before I was reading from Study Quran, right now, it's the purification of the soul. It's this one. It's one of my favorites to go back to. I've had it since I was in college, and I mean, an undergrad. And subhanAllah, it's just a beautiful reminder every time. Now, this is not in the book, but just something I'm going to share is that one of the Bedouins, he came to the Prophet Muhammad SAW, and when he saw the generosity that the Prophet Muhammad SAW had with the companions in giving out spoils of war, he actually went back to his tribe and he told his tribe to bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad SAW was a prophet of God. And his reason was, he is a man who gives like he has no fear of poverty. Like he gives money like he has no fear of poverty. That to him was a proof that this is someone who is sent as a prophet from God. They to be able to give without the concern that it's going to get less, that he'll experience hardship or poverty or poorness or anything. To experience being receiving in that way is what put iman in the heart of this Bedouin. And generosity like that is really powerful. And I know that, alhamdulillah, in the month of Ramadan, people give charity, and they know we've talked about it a lot, that wealth is not decreased by charity. But to know that our giving, and people vary in their levels of giving, all in a time of quote unquote uncertainty like the COVID-19 crisis. It's even harder sometimes for people to try to give because they're afraid of what's going to happen with their work and what's going to happen with the economy, and all of that. But this is, the statement that if you had all relied on Allah as you should rely on Him, then your state would not be in this level of worry. Now, I say that to say that there is a high level of tawakkul for some people that some people can have, and other people may not have that same level. There was a companion of the Prophet Muhammad SAW, and people were coming to give money to help finance one of the battles. And um, as the story goes, we know the story when Umar radiallahu anhu, he comes with half of his wealth, and we know that before him, Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu had already come and given all of his wealth. And the Prophet ﷺ accepted both from both of them. Then a different companion comes and tries to give all of their wealth, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't actually accept it from them and told them that this would be a fitna for them, and he told them to take some back. And so there is such a thing, like I said, an isti'jal is to like rush something past its time, or when it's not actually ripe. It's not the right time for it, it's not the right place for it. And what we learned from the Prophet Muhammad SAW encouraging that particular companion to take some of his wealth back is he didn't want the companion to give in such a way that would be a fitna for his own iman. Like if he experiences a hardship and then as a result of that hardship he thinks badly about the religion or badly about Allah or badly about the Prophet SAW, astaghfirullah, we don't know what the test could be for someone. So it's better for that person not to give in a way that would try their actual iman. And for others, uh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them other companions like the Abu Bakr Siddiq or Umar radiallahu anhu, had given them in spiritual strength and certainty a level of tawakkul which they would not be harmed in their faith if they gave in that way. Even if that worldly consequence might be similar, that this person's going to be poor and that person's going to be poor. But in the heart, one person is not poor, right? In the heart, one person is still enriched with faith, and the giving only increases them in faith. And so just to know that about ourselves, that to not assume that we're in a it doesn't mean don't try hard, don't strive to have trust in God, but we don't know. There's different levels, right, of all of these beautiful qualities that we strive for. So we seek to make it a practice and then to increase in it gently, and to go back to it when we slip, and again to seek that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately is the one who allows us to rely on him in the best way, in the way that is most beloved to him. The Prophet Muhammad SAW is one who has commanded us to the ways and means. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even, we see that in what happens after Uhud, right? Like the Prophet ﷺ forgives them and then he continues to consult them. So there's this, you have to take asbab. You have to, we know the saying, like tie the camel first, right? You have to do the work on a worldly level. And it's described, so some of the scholars describe that reliance is the state of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like his spiritual state in his heart is that he's relying on Allah, but striving, right, doing the work to, whether it's to earn a living or the sustenance or whatever it is from his sunnah. And so the one who seeks to emulate his state, let them also emulate his sunnah. The scholars have also said that to strive or to take the means for a particular situation, to work hard for a particular situation, that is from the sharia, that's from the law. And to rely on Allah is from iman, it's from tawheed. So the law is something that shows up in our limbs, right? And tawakkul is something that shows up in our heart. So some people would say that um, I, I didn't prepare for my, I don't know, for my test in school. I didn't prepare for my test because I'm just going to have tawakkul. That's not tawakkul. That's what the scholars call tawakkul, which is a different word, and it's basically like making an excuse. Um, the person has fooled themselves. You're supposed to prepare. You're supposed to study. After you've studied, right? Then when you're resolved, then you put your trust in God, and then you go and take your test. Um, so, but it doesn't mean that a person intends from the beginning, I'm not going to study because I'm just going to have trust in God. A person doesn't intend from the beginning, I'm not going to work because I'm just going to have trust in God. A person doesn't intend from the beginning, I'm not going to try to read Quran during Ramadan. I'm just going to have trust in God that He's going to let me read whatever amount that He wants me to read. On one level, yes, He will allow us to read whatever level, an amount of Quran that's pleasing to Him and that He wants for us. But that doesn't mean that we would just leave it and just say, I'm not going to do anything until it comes to me. We are supposed to go out and do the deeds, and that is Sharia, that is the law. But while we're doing those deeds, that our heart that we are not putting our internal, spiritual, heartfelt trust in our deeds. If we put our heartfelt trust in our deeds when we're doing the deeds, then every time we make a slip in our deeds, right? That's what we learned from the first hikmah of the hikmah of Ibn Atta'illah, that whoever relied on their deeds, then they lose hope whenever a downfall occurs. But if our reliance is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while the deeds are on our limbs, then we don't lose hope, because the hope continues. The hope is what is fueling the heart, that it's not, the deeds are there as an act of obedience, right? The deeds are an act of obedience. This is part of the Sharia. But the heart is tied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hoping for the good from Him, and they don't lose hope, because the reliance is not on the deeds. I hope that is clear. And if someone has a question about that, they can ask in the chat box. Even the month of Ramadan that we fast, the Prophet ﷺ describes that imanan wa ihtisaban, that they do it with faith and ihtisab, like hoping for the reward of being forgiven and having all their sins washed away, hoping for that, complete cleansing that happens in this month, for the spiritual rank or the spiritual reward from God. So you don't do the deeds just hoping for the deeds in themselves. We don't worship the deeds. There's a hope that's attached to the deeds, that through striving and fasting in this way, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give us these rewards. It's done with hope in God. And so that's a huge part of tawakkul, is continuing hope. One of our teachers once gave the advice is to never give up making dua even until the last moment. Never stop supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about a difficulty or a hardship or about something, even to the last moment. Continue to call upon Him, continue to ask Him. And so that brings up the dilemma, because some people have mentioned that if there are people who are so busy with dhikr that they don't make dua. That doesn't mean that the person who's so busy with dhikr and remembering God, um, has completely abandoned all asbab. It's just that that's the worship that they're more, I want to say, inclined to in that moment. And there are moments in life where you really, even if when you try to make dua, you can't, because there's nothing left in your mind. I remember when we met for example, for Umrah, with the majlis. And I had a list of all these prayers I needed to get through that I wrote down before I went, and people who had asked for different prayers, and I had it written down. And then I remember thinking to myself that, okay, after I finished all of the prayers that everyone asked me to make during tawaf, then um, then I'm going to get to make, like, I'll get to pray and make dua for a bunch of things that I've always, I'll have the time to do it. And I remember, like, I was looking at the Kaaba and I'm like, I just can't. Like, I have nothing to say. I have nothing. I mean, other than, like, I just like the reality of being in front of the Kaaba and feeling the presence of God is so overwhelming that you can't, like, you feel like all of your prayers have already been answered. Now, thousands of miles away from the Kaaba, and the blessing and the barakah of that beautiful place, um, thousands of miles away, I have so many du'as that I want to make, right? And especially in the month of Ramadan, I have tons. I could fill a notebook of du'as. And so, so long as the du'a and the supplication exists, we make it, right? So long as there's the, oh Allah, I need this. Oh Allah, please help me with this or help me with that. So long as it's there, um, then that's something, that's an indication to make that prayer, to supplicate in that way. And so this advice of the teacher to never abandon making dua until the last minute, especially in hardships or difficulties, um, is a way that we rely on God, to not supplicate and to say, I'm just content with God's decree, however it goes. If a person really has that spiritual state, then that's one thing. And I'm not saying, there are people who have that state. There's, subhanAllah, there are people who have reached that place, and it's a beautiful place if they've reached there. But to not be like the person who's coming with all their wealth, thinking that they have reached that place, and in reality they haven't. And the Prophet ﷺ says, no, if you do this, this will be a fitna for you. And another person actually needs to make dua, because if they don't, they will fall into despair. If they don't vocalize to God their need, if they don't turn to Him and hope and asking, then by not asking, what they mistake, they're not asking for so-called contentment, but in reality they become depressed and they become numb, and that becomes a sign that they've actually, fallen into a level of despair, that they don't actually think their prayer would be or could be answered. And that's why they're not making dua, because, quote unquote, what's the point? And may Allah protect us all from that. So dua is a sign of relying on God. It's a sign of hope in God. It's a sign of knowing that the outcomes come to us from God and not from ourselves to Him. And it is one of the things that helps us to have tawakkul, and to do, even in our dua, as Sheikh Walid Musad mentions in his series, to do tafweed. So when there are worldly matters, maybe there's something that we want, that we say, oh Allah, please grant me this, if it is good for me. And if it is not good for me, then give me what is better, right? It doesn't have to be the whole dua of istikhara every time, but always doing tafweed. If that's what's best for me, if that's what is khair, oh Allah. So you don't make it like I'm asking for this worldly thing, or, whatever thing. And uh, need it to be a certain way, right? Um, Even things that are encouraged in the religion, like marriage. A person could be single and say, "Oh Allah, I really want to get married this year." But even in that prayer, "Oh Allah, help me to get married this year if it is good for me." That's tafweed. That's really putting the reliance in Allah. You have a need, you're stating it to Him, but then you're saying, "And you know best, and I accept what you decree for me, and you know best." Um, so that's one aspect of the process, is to do the physical actions that are involved in that matter, to intend to do them, and then also to make dua for the success of that. That's another way that that we show our reliance. And one of the, some it's one of the earlier peoples had mentioned that do what you like a man who can only be saved by his actions, and rely completely on Allah like a man who can only be afflicted by the afflictions that have already been decreed for him. So I think that's interesting. It's the same concept. If you know the Yom Al Qiyamah, that Yom Al Qiyamah is going to happen tomorrow, and you have a seed in your plant in your hand, and you wanted to plant it, you still plant it. Um, we, subhanallah, how this religion brings together so many like seeming opposites. They're not opposites, but they look like opposites. Someone who's striving, like everything depends on their deeds, and yet in their heart they're resigned to God's decree, and they have so much reliance upon Him, as if everything will only come in, only everything only comes from Him without the actions. To have both in the same person, and obviously it's a practice and it takes time. So people know I'm reading currently from page 107 in the book. It's mentioned that there are actions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made a part of our lives, that He's encouraged us not to allow, to put ourselves basically in harm's way, and that if we are neglectful in those things, then we've been neglectful. That's not tawakkul, that's just being neglectful. As an example, eating when we're hungry, or drinking when we're thirsty, seeking shade in the heat, keeping warm in cold weather, basically taking the precautions that we should take to be safe, to be okay. And if a person deliberately abandons them out of thinking that this is a kind of tawakkul, then that's a form of neglect, because Allah has commanded us to protect ourselves from harm. The third are actions that are general actions. They're not necessarily essential, but a servant can do what they choose in those matters. Something that's really interesting in this regard is there's a debate between the scholars about if someone is sick, should they take medicine or not? If someone is sick, do they take medicine, and um, is that a sign of tawakkul, right? That they take the medicine and they hope for the cure from God? Or um, if they are, or is tawakkul to not take medicine at all and just ask for the cure? Interestingly, and be accepting of, if even if they're not cured, like being open to being to dying or whatnot. And so there's a difference of opinion, because they were asked what's better, what's a higher form of tawakkul. So Imam Ahmed says that reliance on Allah for one who is sick is better, meaning don't take the medicine. And he cites a narration from the Prophet Muhammad SAW, 70,000 people of my ummah will enter the garden without being taken into account or being punished. They are the ones who do not make talismans or seek them or look for omens or treat their body by burning, and who completely rely on their Lord. And that's the narration that he cites. Others, they disagreed with that, and they said that the proof that the higher level of reliance is actually in taking the medicine is that the Prophet Muhammad SAW himself took medicine, and he only did what was best. And they also mentioned that using that narration to prove it didn't necessarily apply in the same way, because people who use talismans, they can easily, as a result, think that what protected them was the talisman, or was the whatever it is, and they would put their reliance in those things instead of God. And so, and that's an even, a greater indication that reliance, it's not true reliance, if people are using those things. Different, some of the tabi'een, including Mujahid, Ikrama, and Nukhai, or An-Nakhai, they said, several of our predecessors said, no one has been given permission to totally abandon trying use the ways and means of this world for treating their afflictions, except for one whose heart has altogether ceased to relate to the creation. Okay, so I just realized how bad my video view is. Forgive me for that. So, so no one has been given permission to totally abandon trying to use the ways and means of this world for treating their afflictions, except for the one whose heart has altogether ceased to relate to the creation. Does that mean they're saying that that no one on earth ever can, abandon the ways and means? I'm going to ask this question to Asnawi. So now we're on page 108. No one has been given permission to totally abandon trying to use the ways and means of this world for treating his afflictions, except one whose heart has altogether ceased to relate to the creation or rely on the creation. So, mashallah, he says, I think it means exceptions do exist. And that's right. There are people who have the idhn to do to abandon ways and means because they have this spiritual state that is that high, because their hearts do not rely on the creation. And this is, I mean, a clear evidence of that is Abu Bakr Siddiq again coming and giving all of his wealth to the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam asked him, what did you leave your family? And he says, I left them with Allah, right? Like he, in his messenger. So you have here the um, faith, the level of faith that allows someone to not take even the money they need for survival because they have a different state. They have a different spiritual state than others. And not everyone is in that, I mean, I shouldn't say not everyone, but there are going to be the elite of our ummah, right? The Prophet Muhammad SAW said that if you were to take the iman of Abu Bakr and put it on a scale and put the iman of the entire ummah of the Prophet Muhammad SAW on the other side of the scale, the iman or the faith of Abu Bakr Siddiq would be heavier, just his faith. So there are going to be, not just in the time of the Prophet Muhammad SAW and in the time of the companions, but even throughout history, there will always be people who are inheritors of the Prophet Muhammad SAW, even on a spiritual level, and they will have hearts that do not rely on creation. They will be few. They will not. They're not the many that are there, but they do exist. Ishaq ibn Rahaway, he said, can a man engage in warfare without making any preparation for it? He was asked that question, and he said, he can if he is like Abdullah ibn Jubair, otherwise he cannot. So, this is important. It's important that when we talk about humility, that we have, when we talk about tawakkul, that we have humility with it, that we don't know the level of certainty in our hearts, that we don't know the level of trust in our hearts, and that we seek to trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we strive to do it. And part of the practice of striving is to take the asbab. Let's say a person finds themselves in a situation, it's the month of Ramadan, they wanted to finish the whole Quran, you're in the last 10 nights, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm nowhere near finishing it however many times you wanted to finish it in this month. What am I going to do? Do make a plan. Don't just say, I'm going to just see what happens every night. Don't be that person. Make a plan, and know that Allah will only allow us to complete from that plan whatever He decreed. Um, but do the deeds, and then as best as you can, strive in it, and again try to make something that is doable for you in your situation and your context in terms of how much Quran you'd like to complete, how much tarawih you'd like to pray, and knowing again that we're doing these deeds ultimately to seek God's love. That worship is an act of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves from us. And so we're turning to Him, seeking His love through these actions. And so make a plan for yourself, but then afterwards, after and even timing and use your planner and schedule things as you can. And even the best, planning experts say that whenever you put a plan in a planner, It's good to know from the beginning you may not get more than 60% of that done. But had you not made a plan at all, you would have gotten a whole lot less done. You would have done maybe 10% of that. So there is some benefit to making a plan, to again putting our trust in God by asking for His help and turning to Him and asking for Him the capacity, the ability, the time, the opening to be able to do that worship for Him. And that if for whatever reason we're not able to, that Allah replaces it with whatever worship is more beloved to Him in that time. We may think that finishing more ajza is more beloved to Him, but maybe at that moment, taking care of a baby who's waking up from sleep a lot or whatever it is more beloved to Him, and we end up spending our time in that. But let it be about His love and not about our actions. Again, that doesn't mean don't make a plan. I wanted to read a couple um, stories, just two very short stories. And Ibn Ajiba mentions this, and he talks about the beautiful name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Wakil. So the one who trusts Allah is a mutawakkil, and Allah is the one who we entrust. He is the trustee, or the best of those to put our trust. And uh, a good way to think about it is, or a way to think about it is, um, when people take lawyers, for example, they're called wakils, right? They have a lawyer, they give the lawyer all the information that the lawyer needs, and then they ask the lawyer to advocate on their behalf with the judge. And for us, subhanAllah, when we entrust all of our affairs and everything that we hope and wish for, we entrust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with those things. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is both the one that we entrust, and He's also the judge, He's the qadi. That He will judge us on the day of judgment. And so, subhanAllah, we are in a winning situation. And when if you imagine in a courtroom, if your lawyer and your judge is the same person, do you have any possibility of losing if you really trusted them, right? So all we really have to do is put our trust. It's related. Wuri said, I once owed a debt that had weighed heavily upon my chest, but I saw a dream in which someone said to me, you miser, you take such and such amount of money with me as your guarantor, me, capital M, and then have the audacity to suspect me of not taking care of your debt. It is for you to take and for me to repay it. He says, I woke up and soon thereafter I was blessed to repay the debt. After that incident, I never demanded exact change from the butcher or the greengrocer. So these are just spiritual experiences of great sages in our history. It's also related from Ahmed ibn Khudraway. He was on his deathbed and he owed 70,000 dirhams, which is, he says, 700 mithqals. So he convened a meeting with all of his debtors and said, oh God, let my soul be a pawn in their hands. If you will to take my soul, then see that their rights are fulfilled. So all he could do in that moment in terms of fulfilling asbab was just to make a prayer to Allah and to rely on Him. And immediately after that, he says, at that very moment, someone knocked on the door and said, everyone to whom Ahmed owes money should step outside. And the man paid his debt, after which Ahmed ibn Khudraway, he died. May Allah have mercy upon him. And so there are all these stories in Islamic history of people who they had run out of the ways and means. They had run out of, like, they couldn't do we're supposed to consult people, we're supposed to take the medicine, we're supposed to do the work, we're supposed to plan and try our best with our, but there are times when all of those ways and means are completely blocked off. In those situations, all you have is tawakkul. You have your supplication and you have your reliance on Allah. And even, I shouldn't say all you have, even when you have those deeds, you have tawakkul. That's just the etiquette of showing our tawakkul to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is by still reflecting obedience on our limbs and striving on our limbs, quote unquote, tying the camel. So I hope that inshallah inspires us in these last 10 nights that we put our trust in Allah. We try hard. And if we need to pick me up in these last 10 nights, we weren't going as good as we wanted to until this point, may Allah help us to do better now, and we have another chance to do more, inshallah, for His sake, and to gain more reward, and of course to gain more of His love above and beyond all of that. And whatever I said that is beneficial is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever I said that is wrong and mistaken is from myself and shaitan. If someone wants to ask a question on the chat box, you guys can ask. We don't actually have very much time for questions, but if there's one question, we can take one question. Okay, alhamdulillah. So we will close inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضى واجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم آمين يا رب العالمين اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad, his noble family, companions, and followers. O God, give us success to attain what you love and are pleased with. Make us among your felicitous servants. Allow us to die on the statement of guidance. Teach us what will benefit us and give us success to act upon what you taught us. Make that in which we are engaged pure and devoted to your noble face. Ameen, O Lord of the worlds. O God, make this gathering of ours a gathering enveloped in mercy, and our parting thereafter a parting of our sins purged and forgiven, not one of us wretched or deprived, and peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and upon his noble family, followers, and companions. Ameen. Thank you all for joining. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.